So last week I was on a green screen. This is not a green screen, believe it or not. I am in the beautiful Lake Como right now reporting to you because, of course, we had the Italian Grand Prix. And just when we thought the 2020 season was gonna be a boring one, in comes Monza with a race like we saw on Sunday. Now, if you haven't seen the race and you're watching this video, stop, immediately, leave, and go and watch the highlights because that race was just, I don't even know how to describe that race. I'm still processing that race, to be honest. But let's go into driver ratings because there are some interesting scores this week. So let's start off with the team that should have had this in the bag, and for the first few laps of the Grand Prix looked to have it in the bag, and that is of course Mercedes. Now, interesting things on both sides of the garage at Mercedes. Let's start off with Lewis Hamilton, who, as I've just said, had a 12.5-second lead before the safety car, looked to be absolutely breezing away until it all went slightly wrong. We're giving Lewis Hamilton a 7 out of 10 today, and he can't score higher than that based on our scoring system. Missing the pit lane closure boards meant that he made a major error that ultimately cost him the win. And albeit it was, for some people, the call on that was on a nice edge, he had two clear indicators that the pit lane was closed. The fact that the pit lane was closed was actually only noticed by one of the engineers back in the Brackley factory and not on the pit wall, which does go to show Mercedes actually can make mistakes. He still had a great qualifying though, and the fact that he was able to charge back up through the pack to finish where he finished shows that he's still got battle left in him. Valtteri Bottas wasn't a great day for Bottas, and we're giving him a 5 out of 10 for Sunday's efforts. Now, again, another bad start proved so costly to him. And he says that he's got something that's distracting him in the Mercedes cockpit. We're not really sure what. It hasn't come out as to what it is. In Hungary, where he had another really bad start, it was the fact that he had some lights going off on his dash that was confusing him against the lights on the gantry. But we were told that was fixed. So what else is it that's in Valtteri's cockpit that's causing him to have these bad starts? And it's really these races where Hamilton makes an error that Bottas has to capitalise if he wants to get anywhere close to Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. And the fact that he was pretty much stuck in 5th for most of the race, couldn't pass, was really struggling with the overheating problems in that Mercedes car. He still failed to make progress once he got ahead of Perez and Ricciardo at the pit stop. Flip side, let's talk about AlphaTauri, because I know that you're all probably wanting to know, how can we give Gasly anything other than a 10? We can't. He's getting a 10. It was simply outstanding, pretty much all of the weekend, getting the absolute most out of that AlphaTauri and converting it to his first Formula One Grand Prix win. It was really fairy tale-esque, and the emotion that was felt, it was palpable. I mean, I was crying, everyone was crying. It was just such a, after everything that he went through last year, all the psychological torments that were thrown his way, the loss of Antoine Hubert, getting demoted back down to AlphaTauri as it is now, just the fact that he was able to pick himself up and put in performances like he has done across this season. We've already been talking about how he's the standout star potentially of 2020, definitely one to keep watching out for. The fact that he's converted that into a win, that's a 10 out of 10 performance in my book. Let's go into the actual breakdown though. So he reached Q3 for the 5th time in 2020 in an AlphaTauri, and in that race he did absolutely everything that he could. Granted, he got a little bit lucky with the way that everything panned out and the fact that he pitted ahead of the safety car, which was crucial, but he still managed to convert that all into a race win, and for that, it's a perfect score. I feel a bit sorry for Daniel Kvyat because he still had a really good race as well, but that's always going to be overshadowed by the fact that his teammate is standing on the top step. So we're still going to give Kvyat an 8 out of 10 for his performance. 9th in an AlphaTauri at the end of a race is still a pretty good result. He was still only a 10th of a second from getting into Q3, which is, I guess, marginal, but it does make all the difference in that midfield pack. Overall, decent performance. Now, another star of the weekend is Carlos Sainz, who just put in a phenomenal weekend's drive. He's getting a 10 out of 10 from us as well. He was another outstanding star of qualifying, putting that McLaren into P3 at Monza, and he looked like he was going to get P2 regardless of what happened in that race. He didn't drop off in the first half of the race, which maybe some people thought, oh, he's not going to be able to hold on to that podium position. he looked racy the entire time. His start was absolutely sublime, getting the jump on Bottas, flying up, and as I said, he didn't drop back, which just goes to show what that McLaren's got in it. He chased Gasly down really well in the closing stages of the race and didn't show any sign of giving up. In fact, giving his race engineer Tom a bit of an earful, telling him how much he wanted this win, and that was pretty clear from the way that he was racing as well. But he did magnanimously accept defeat, even if he was ruining the way that the safety car and red flag fell. His teammate also had a good race, and that's why Lando Norris is getting a 9 out of 10 from us this week. Even though his teammate got the glory, Norris's start in particular for me was really showing of what he is capable of as a wheel-to-wheel racer. And he might have even got a maximum score from us had it not been for his qualifying defeat to his teammate, which, as you know, we love to take marks off for. He earns an extra mark for his lap 1 pass of Bottas and for keeping the Mercedes behind him for 25 laps of the race. He had maybe a slight mark against him for that strange, well, it wasn't strange at all, was it? He was slowing down in the pit lane so that McLaren could double stack effectively and he wasn't going to lose too much time, but he was cleared of any wrongdoing. So in our book, it wasn't an error. Let's move on to the third team that took P3 in the race on Sunday, and that is, of course, Racing Point. And Lance Stroll, he could have won that race. I mean, all three of them could have won that race at some point, but Stroll looked to be in a really strong position because he didn't have to take a mandatory pit stop because, I mean, is it a risky strategy from Racing Point to have not pitted him? Potentially. Had that red flag not fallen, would he have been in trouble? Hard to tell because, as we know, these are all what ifs. But he did get a free stop, managed to switch on to a fresh set of mediums, and had he not have messed up that restart, he was going to be net leader. He said he was struggling with grip, said that the wheels were spinning up until 4th gear, but a podium's a good result. So Lance Stroll, 7 out of 10 for you. Sergio Perez is getting a 6 out of 10, and he loses a mark to his teammate thanks to his poor start, even though he had put in a good qualifying performance. Like Bottas, it is possible to trace most of his woes in that race back to that poor start because it meant that he was forced to follow Norris into a pit stop, and he was unfortunate with that right front getting a bit sticky and slowing him way down. At the restart, he was forced off at turn 2 thanks to the Verstappen slide, and claimed that from that point his car was damaged, so there was little that he could do. Renault. Now, I think everyone was slightly disappointed with the Renault performance, given that this time last year it was their best performance of the season and they were looking really racy, but it didn't quite convert yesterday. And I think Daniel Ricciardo, who we're giving an 8 out of 10 for his drive, he seemed maybe slightly disappointed, but he also said that he couldn't have done any more than he did. He doesn't score higher than an 8 because he didn't shine in qualifying despite his FP2 pace, but it was a decent weekend, so 8 out of 10. Ocon is marked down compared to his teammate because he was kicked out in Q2. But he performed well in the race and he actually overtook Gasly after his lap 1 off. He claimed Renault didn't have mediums ready to go at the restart, which meant that he had to move on to softs, which degraded, and he felt stymied his chances, which also led to a rather fractious radio exchange on the cool-down lap. Take a listen to that if you can. It was an emotional weekend for the Williams team as we said goodbye to the Williams family, and I just felt like the perfect leaving gift would have been points, but unfortunately it was out of their reach for this weekend. Even though at one point Nicholas Latifi was in the points running at P9 at the red flag. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to give him a 7 out of 10. And Latifi, I felt, battled well during that race, given that the Williams has this kind of uncharacteristically bad balance that they can't quite put their finger on as to why it's happening. And he clearly enjoyed passing Raikkonen out on track. So decent day in the office for Latifi. Now, George Russell is going to get the same mark as his teammate, primarily because neither of them particularly did anything wrong. It's just that the way that the race fell favoured Latifi and he managed to maintain position, whereas George Russell lost out and it meant that he fell further back. So, but neither of them did anything wrong, pushed as much as they could push. So hard really to split the two Williams boys apart. Now, Haas. Thank you, Kevin Magnussen, because without you, doing what you did, stopping where you stopped, we might have not had the race that we did. Now, I might have given him a 10 out of 10 just purely because of that, but obviously that would be unfair because he didn't have a brilliant race, so he's getting a 6 out of 10 for his performance. Magnussen might have got one more point from us had it not been for his off at the second Lesmo during his Q2 run, and that's because he had the pace to beat Raikkonen to 14th on the grid, but that kind of cost him. He couldn't really do anything about the unfortunate squeeze into turn 1, which gave him damage, and he was pretty much hampered from that point onwards. That meant he was running in 18th when a power unit issue struck, and he had to stop where he stopped, and the rest, as you know, plays out quite nicely. Not for him, but for us. Now let's move on to Alfa Romeo, who were running in P2 and 3 at the restart. We're going to give Kimi Raikkonen a 7 out of 10. Now, it's not clear what else Kimi Raikkonen could have done this weekend, really. He was fast enough in his initial Q1 runs that meant that he could benefit from the chaos that ultimately ended that session. And his slipstreaming of Ocon acted as practice for what was to be a quite eventful race for Raikkonen. But he looked racy again, and that was really, really good to see. And it was just unfortunate that the tyre strategy didn't work for him, and he ended up slipping backwards. Now, Giovinazzi's getting a 5 out of 10 from us, and he loses 2 marks on his teammate for several reasons. The first is to do with his Q1 exit, because he didn't do enough before all that chaos kicked off to put him further up the pack. He had a turn 2 clash with Magnussen, which, to be honest, he was pretty blameless in. It was just unfortunate. But he also loses a mark because he had the same issue as Hamilton. He came into the pit lane when it was closed, and that meant that when he took his penalty, he ended up last on the road. Now, where AlphaTauri shone, their sister team had a pretty awful Italian Grand Prix. Now, Albon was closer to Verstappen than he has been in the past. He was only 3 tenths behind him in qualifying, but that was the difference of 3 grid positions, which ultimately cost him a lot. He picked up damage on that turn 1, lap 1 incident with Gasly, but he was careless to drift left into Grosjean on lap 2, which earned him a 5-second time penalty. His resulting stop cost him 3 places, and he never really recovered from that. Now, as we've said on previous episodes, it's very rare that we haven't given Max Verstappen a 9 or a 10 out of 10, but this week he's getting a 6. It was an unusually subpar weekend for Verstappen, who never really showed any pace and was complaining a lot about the balance of the car, losing speed. He qualified behind 2 slower cars and then lost 2 positions on the lead into turn 1. He chased Bottas kind of fruitlessly after that, and then at the restart he ended up pushing Perez into the gravel, which was pretty sloppy. Now, predictably, Ferrari had a weekend that they would rather forget at their home Grand Prix, but a double DNF. I don't know what would be worse, them trotting around at the back of the grid or a double DNF. Haven't quite decided what's worse. But in any case, it was a double DNF. Leclerc is getting a 6 out of 10, and predominantly for his mistake into Parabolica, which caused a pretty nasty looking accident, and we were all really thankful that he was okay and managed to walk out of that seemingly uninjured. But it was damaging, literally, for his entire race, and then caused the red flag scenario, which a lot of drivers were very unhappy about, but some were happy. He did put that Ferrari arguably as high up the grid as was possible at Monza, so that does earn him some points back. He struggled for grip after starting on softs and had to make an early pit stop, which again hurt his track positioning, but at least he was delighted to pass the 2 Alphas. I mean, consolation prize. Sebastian Vettel is getting the same mark as his teammate, and that's predominantly because we can only really judge him on his qualifying performance. So I know a lot of you in the comments are going to say that's unfair, it needs to be a whole weekend performance, but also his DNF wasn't down to driver error like it was for Leclerc. He had brake failure, quite catastrophically. Absolutely powering through those polystyrene barriers, which I just thought was peak 2020 energy, to be honest. But nevertheless, he was initially in danger of getting kicked out of Q1 because he gave Leclerc the toe. But anyway, we're going to judge him on his qualifying. So he was in danger of elimination from Q1 because he led the Ferrari pair out to give Leclerc the initial toe. And by the time he came back around to do his quick lap, he then got caught up in the late traffic chaos, which ultimately cost him because that car had pace for Q2. So that's all the drivers rated for the Italian Grand Prix. What were your impressions? Do you agree with our ratings? Do you disagree with our ratings? I know tons of you out there disagree. But if you do, head on over to autosport.com where you can re-rate the drivers based on our ratings and give them an average score. And we will put them in this video as well so we can compare the Autosport driver ratings with the fan driver ratings and see how closely they pair up. Big thank you to everyone that left your feedback regarding the new format for Autosport driver ratings. Glad that some of you enjoyed it, and we are taking a lot of your feedback on board. And also make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to be doing these videos after every single Formula 1 Grand Prix of the 2020 season. And with that said, I'll see you after Mugello.